In an elegant mansion, a girl suffered in silence under the cruel rule of her stepmother. A simple mistake revealed the violence hidden behind appearances. The father, returning unexpectedly, discovered secrets that would change everything. And in the midst of chaos, the chance to start over was born, where love finally conquered fear. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The century-old mansion, high in the Blue Ridge Mountains, gleamed in the afternoon sun of Aspen Heights, imposing among the pine trees that swayed in the cold July wind. For tourists passing by on the winding road, that European-style manor represented the charm and luxury of the most elegant town in the English countryside. Few imagined that, behind its stone walls and ornate windows, lived an 11-year-old girl whose eyes no longer knew how to smile. Beatrice Alcott Meadows, with brown hair and honey-colored eyes, watched the garden through the misted window pane. Her small, rough fingers traced invisible patterns on the glass as she waited for the familiar sound, the click of Selina, her stepmother's stiletto heels tapping on the noble wooden floor. "Beatrice, where have you gotten to, girl? These silver pieces won't polish themselves." The voice echoed through the hallway like a whip. Beatrice sighed, quickly moving away from the window. Ever since her mother, Caroline, had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness, the mansion that once overflowed with music and laughter had transformed into a silent prison. Her father, Richard Meadows, owner of one of the country's largest hotel chains, had plunged into work as one dives into an abyss to forget pain. And when, a year later, he introduced Selina as his new wife, Beatrice realized that the loneliness had only just begun. "I'm coming, Selina," she replied, descending the stairs carefully so as not to irritate her further. The 35-year-old woman waited in the hall, impeccable in her navy blue linen suit. Her perfectly made-up face hid a coldness that only revealed itself when Richard left on his frequent business trips. "Like now. Just look at you, all disheveled. What would your father think if he saw those dirty nails?" Selina gripped Beatrice's wrist with unnecessary force. "Isn't it enough that I have agreed to raise another woman's child? Do I also have to teach the basics of hygiene and etiquette?" Beatrice lowered her eyes, swallowing the retort she would never give. In truth, her nails were dirty because she had spent the entire morning cleaning the silver chandeliers in the dining room, a task Selina insisted she do personally, even with 3 maids available. "Sorry, I'll wash them before polishing the silver," she murmured. Selina released her wrist with an exaggerated sigh. "Do that, and then I want everything sparkling for dinner tonight. Your Uncle Thaddeus is coming to visit." Beatrice stifled a shiver. Thaddeus Vance, Selina's older brother, was a corpulent man with an invasive gaze who always made comments about how she was growing up beautifully. Each of his visits meant another sleepless night, with a chair propped against her bedroom doorknob. In the kitchen, Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper who had served the family since before Beatrice's birth, was preparing a cornbread cake. The 60-year-old woman was the last link to happier times, a presence Selina tolerated only because Richard insisted on keeping her. "My little one, come here," Eleanor called softly, checking that they were alone. "Eat a piece while it's warm. You barely touched your lunch today." Beatrice gratefully accepted the still steaming slice of cake. She ate quickly, knowing Selina could appear at any moment. "Mrs. Eleanor, do you think Dad is really coming back this weekend?" she asked, hopefully. The housekeeper stroked her hair tenderly. "He promised, didn't he?" Your father never breaks promises." What Eleanor didn't say, but both knew, was that Richard Meadows had been breaking promises ever since he remarried. Missed calls, cancelled weekends, forgotten school events. Not out of malice, but out of an absence that seemed increasingly permanent. Outside, a car crunched to a stop on the gravel driveway. Beatrice ran to the kitchen window, recognizing Thaddeus's black Porsche. He stepped out, sporting an expensive suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Your uncle has arrived," Eleanor commented, not hiding her tone of disapproval. "You'd better go polish that silver before the lady of the house starts shouting." In the secluded study, Selina received her brother with 2 glasses of whiskey and a closed door. They spoke in low, urgent tones, like conspirators. "Are you sure about this, Thaddeus? We can't make a false move." The man laughed, a harsh sound like paper tearing. "Absolutely." Richard signed the documents without reading them, as he always does when you ask with that sweet voice. He took a generous sip of his drink. "In 6 months, we'll own 40% of the Meadows Hotel's chain. After that, it's just a matter of time until we gain full control." Selina smiled, a gesture that transformed her beautiful face into something predatory. "And the girl? She's still a problem." Thaddeus shrugged, indifferent. "Children are easily manipulated. When we're her legal guardians, we can send her to some boarding school in Switzerland. Or better yet, ... double quotes. His eyes gleamed with a new idea. "We can use her mother's inheritance to fund our expansion." Unaware of the conversation that would seal her fate, Beatrice rubbed the silver cutlery in the dining room. Each movement was mechanical, trained by months of forced labor. As she polished a spoon, she saw her distorted reflection in the metal. Her thin face. The sad eyes of someone who had grown up too fast. That night, during dinner, Beatrice ate in silence, while Selina and Thaddeus discussed business with exaggerated enthusiasm. From time to time, she felt the man's gaze on her, calculating and cold. "And how's school, little B?" Thaddeus suddenly asked, interrupting a conversation about acquisitions. "Fine, uncle," she replied automatically, although it wasn't true. Her grades, once exemplary, had plummeted since Selina began to overload her with household chores. "I imagine you're looking forward to summer vacation," he continued, cutting a piece of meat. "Perhaps we could take you to see our new resort in the Bahamas. What do you think, Selina?" Her stepmother smiled, a rehearsed gesture Beatrice knew all too well. "That would be wonderful. I'm sure Richard would approve." Beatrice felt a chill. Never before had they proposed including her on a trip. Something was wrong. Later, tucked away in her room after washing all the dishes, Beatrice opened the secret drawer where she kept the only portrait Selina hadn't managed to find and destroy, her and Caroline, smiling during a picnic in the garden. In the background, Richard watched them with adoration. "Mummy," she whispered to the photograph, "something bad is happening. I can feel it." The rain began to fall, first lightly, then in heavy torrents that lashed against the mansion's windows. In the Blue Ridge Mountains, July storms could be merciless. Beatrice hugged the portrait and fell asleep like that, unaware that, at an airport hundreds of miles away, her father was deciding, for the first time in 3 years, to cancel an important meeting to return home early. Perhaps out of longing, perhaps out of a premonition he didn't even understand. The morning dawned gray in Aspen Heights. The previous night's storm had left the Meadows mansion garden drenched, with hydrangea petals scattered across the lawn like confetti after an abandoned party. Beatrice awoke with a start to firm knocks on her door. "Wake up now, girl. We have visitors coming this afternoon, and this place is a mess." Selina's shrill voice cut through the solid wood. Beatrice rubbed her eyes, realizing she had fallen asleep, clutching her mother's photograph. She quickly hid it under the mattress before answering, "I'm getting up now, Selina." Outside the room, her stepmother huffed impatiently. "I want the living room impeccable in an hour. The rain brought mud everywhere, and the maids are busy with the special lunch." "Special?" Beatrice frowned as she dressed hastily. It wasn't anyone's birthday, nor was a holiday approaching. Selina rarely received visitors other than Thaddeus, or her few self-serving friends. And those never deserved the adjective special. In the kitchen, Mrs. Eleanor was kneading bread dough with unusual vigor. Her normally serene face was tense, and she avoided looking directly at Beatrice when the girl entered. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. Do you need help?" The housekeeper shook her head negatively. "You'd better start with the living room, as your stepmother asked," she replied in a low voice. "And Beatrice, ... Bold quote." She hesitated, quickly glancing at the door to make sure they were alone. "Stay away from the study today. Thaddeus and Selina have been in there all morning with papers, and don't seem to be in a good mood." Beatrice nodded, intrigued. She grabbed a cloth and cleaning products from the cupboard and headed to the main living room. As she worked on the marble floor, she heard fragments of the conversation coming from the adjacent study, whose double doors were ajar. "He can't just show up like that, without warning." Selina's voice sounded agitated. "We had a plan, Thaddeus. The documents haven't all been processed yet." "Calm down," the man replied impatiently. "Richard has always been predictable. A well-told story about the problematic stepdaughter, and he'll be back in London within 24 hours. Beatrice froze, the cleaning cloth suspended in the air. Her father was coming back. Today? A wave of hope and fear simultaneously washed over her. She moved closer to the door, trying to hear better. "What if he wants to check the accounts? The statements show the transfers." "Don't be stupid," Thaddeus retorted. "No one checks bank statements during a family lunch. Besides, we transferred everything offshore. He'd need a forensic accountant to trace the money now." Beatrice's heart pounded. Money? Transfers? What were they doing? "The girl is the problem," Thaddeus continued. "She observes everything. If she opens her mouth to her father, ... Leave the brat to me," Selina interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. "I have ways of ensuring her silence." A shiver ran down Beatrice's spine. She quickly returned to work when she heard footsteps approaching the door. She pretended to be concentrated on cleaning when Selina emerged from the study, impeccably dressed in a red outfit that contrasted with her nervous paleness. "Still not finished?" she asked, critically observing the living room. Her eyes fell on a Ming vase on the shelf. "And that piece is filthy. Do I really need to supervise every detail in this house?" Before Beatrice could answer, Selina walked to the shelf and picked up the valuable vase with abrupt gestures. "Just look at this. Dust everywhere. Didn't your mother ever teach you to clean properly?" The mention of her mother ignited something within Beatrice, a small flame of rebellion that 3 years of oppression had not managed to completely extinguish. "My mother taught me many things," she replied, raising her gaze to meet her stepmother's, including how to recognize when someone isn't being honest. Selina's face hardened. For an instant, it seemed she would erupt in one of her calculated fits of rage. Instead, her lips curled into an icy smile. "How interesting," she said slowly, turning the valuable vase between her fingers. "You know what else your mother should have taught you? Not to meddle in adult affairs. With a deliberate movement, Selina loosened her fingers. The vase plummeted, shattering on the marble floor with a crash that seemed to echo throughout the mansion. Beatrice gasped, taking a step back, knowing exactly what would come next. "My goodness," Selina exclaimed theatrically. "Look what you've done." This vase was a family heirloom. Thaddeus appeared at the door, drawn by the noise. His eyes quickly assessed the scene, and a crooked smile formed on his lips. "Problems, little sister." "Beatrice knocked over the Ming Dynasty vase," Selina replied, her voice trembling with false indignation. "It was Richard's favorite. A gift from his grandfather." Beatrice opened her mouth to protest, but Thaddeus's warning glance silenced her. She knew it would be useless. It was her word against Selina's, and her father always believed his wife. "I'll get the broom," she murmured, bending down to start picking up the larger shards with her hands. "Leave it," Selina ordered. "You've caused enough damage. Go to your room and don't come out until your father arrives. He needs to see what you've been doing in his absence." With a heavy heart, Beatrice stood up. As she passed Thaddeus at the door, she felt his fingers briefly squeeze her arm. "Accidents happen," he whispered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Especially with careless children. Your father needs to understand that." In the hallway, Mrs. Eleanor waited with a worried expression. She had witnessed everything through the crack in the kitchen door. When Selina and Thaddeus returned to the study, the housekeeper quickly approached Beatrice. "Come with me, quickly," she murmured, pulling her by the hand to the pantry at the back of the kitchen. She closed the door behind them, and, after ensuring no one would hear them, spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Beatrice, your stepmother and her brother are plotting something. Last night, when everyone was asleep, I heard them in the study. They're embezzling money from your father's companies." The girl's eyes widened. "I heard something about transfers today, Mrs. Eleanor. An offshore, whatever that means." The housekeeper sighed heavily. "It means trouble, my dear. Big trouble." She held Beatrice's hands in hers, calloused by decades of work. "When your father arrives, you need to tell him everything. Everything you've seen and heard these past years. He won't believe me," Beatrice replied. Her voice choked with the certainty of 3 years of failed attempts. "Selina always manages to convince him that I'm exaggerating or making up stories." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed her hands tighter. "This time will be different. I have proof." From her apron pocket, she pulled out a small rectangular device. "A recorder?" Beatrice asked, confused. "My nephew gave it to me when I told him about my suspicions. It's small but powerful. It's been hidden behind the study curtain since last night." The housekeeper's wrinkled face lit up with determination. "We have everything recorded, Beatrice. Every dirty word that came out of their mouths." For the first time in a long time, Beatrice felt a spark of true hope. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway interrupted the moment. Mrs. Eleanor quickly put the recorder back in her pocket and raised a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. "It must be your father," she whispered. "Go to your room as Selina ordered. Let me handle the rest." Beatrice nodded and hurried out of the pantry, going up the service stairs to avoid unwanted encounters. From the upper hallway, she saw through the window Richard Meadows' black BMW parking in the fine drizzle that was now falling. Her heart raced as she saw her father getting out of the car, his face tired from hours of travel. He looked up at the mansion, and, for a fleeting instant, his gaze met hers through the window pane. Beatrice saw something rare in those distant eyes. Concern. True concern. Before she could process what that meant, the main door opened. Selina appeared, the embodiment of the devoted wife, her arms open in welcome. Beside her, Thaddeus smiled cordially. The scene seemed straight out of a perfect family commercial, except for the broken vase in the living room and the dark secrets that were finally beginning to emerge from the mansion's shadows. Richard Meadows entered the mansion with an uncomfortable feeling that something had changed during his absence. It wasn't the impeccable decor or the scent of lavender that Selena insisted on maintaining in every room. It was something more subtle, like a discordant note in a family symphony. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise." Selena enveloped him in a practiced embrace, her expensive perfume filling his nostrils. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? We would have prepared something special. It was a last-minute decision," he replied, placing his leather briefcase on the sideboard. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for an instant on the shards carefully piled in a corner of the living room. What happened there? Selena's smile wavered for a fraction of a second before recomposing itself. "Oh, a small accident. Beatrice was cleaning and, well, you know how clumsy she can be sometimes." Thaddeus stepped forward, extending his hand for a vigorous handshake. "Richard, my favorite brother-in-law. Good to see you." His excessively cordial smile contrasted with his calculating gaze. "I was just discussing with Selena some details about the new resort in Brighton Bay. Construction is progressing faster than expected." Richard nodded distractedly, still observing the remains of the vase. "Was that my grandfather's Ming vase?" Something in his voice made Selena stiffen. "Unfortunately, yes. Beatrice knows how valuable it was, but even so ... Double quotes, she left the sentence hanging, sighing dramatically. "I sent her to her room. I thought a conversation with her father might have more impact than my constant scolding." Richard frowned, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. For 3 years, he had unquestioningly accepted Selena's stories about his daughter's rebellious behavior. But now, for the first time, something didn't seem to fit. "Where is Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked suddenly. "In the kitchen, preparing lunch," Selena replied quickly. "Why?" "Nothing in particular." He took a few steps towards the stairs. "I'll talk to Beatrice first. Then we can discuss business, Thaddeus." The look the siblings exchanged did not go unnoticed by Richard, increasing that sense of discomfort that had accompanied him throughout his return journey. Something was wrong in his house, and an inner voice, long dormant, told him it was time to find out what. Upstairs, he paused before his daughter's bedroom door and hesitated. When was the last time he had truly talked to Beatrice? Not just automatic questions and answers about school or piano lessons, but a real conversation. With a sigh, he knocked softly. Then Beatrice's footsteps, and the door opened. Silence. The honey-colored eyes that so reminded him of Caroline looked at him with a mixture of hope and caution that broke his heart. "Hi, Dad," she said simply. Richard entered and closed the door behind him. The room was immaculately tidy, school books stacked on the desk, the bed perfectly made. None of the slovenly behavior Selena so often mentioned. "I heard about the vase." He began carefully observing his daughter's reaction. Her shoulders drooped slightly. "I didn't knock it over," she replied in a low voice, like someone who had already given up on being believed. "It was Selena. She got angry with me because I said I knew she wasn't being honest." The direct admission surprised Richard. He expected denials, perhaps tears or rehearsed apologies. Not this calm resignation of someone merely stating a fact. "What did you mean by that?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and indicating for her to sit beside him. Beatrice hesitated, studying her father's face as if searching for something she had lost long ago. What she saw must have encouraged her, for she took a deep breath and began to speak. "Selina and Thaddeus are embezzling money from your companies, Dad. I heard them talking this morning in the study. They talked about offshore transfers and documents you signed without reading." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. His first instinct was to deny, to defend his wife, to reprimand his daughter for inventing such serious stories. But those honest eyes looked at him with a conviction that could not be fabricated. "There's more," Beatrice continued, seeing that her father hadn't interrupted her. "They said I'm a problem, that after they took control of the companies, they could send me to a boarding school in Switzerland, and ... and that they would use Mummy's inheritance to finance something." The mention of Caroline's inheritance was like an alarm sounding in Richard's mind. Those funds were in an untouchable trust, exclusively intended for Beatrice's future. Or at least they should have been. "Beatrice," he said slowly, trying to organize his thoughts, "this is a very serious accusation. Are you absolutely sure of what you heard?" Instead of answering, she stood up and walked to the bed. She lifted the mattress and pulled out something hidden, a yellowed photograph. "Mummy taught me to always tell the truth, even when it's hard," she said, handing him the portrait. "This is the only one I managed to save. Selina burned all the others when you were away on a trip." Richard gazed at the image, feeling a lump in his throat. Caroline smiled radiantly, her hair wind-blown, embracing an 8-year-old Beatrice. He himself was in the background, watching the two with a love that he now realized he had allowed himself to forget. "Why did you never tell me about the photos?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Beatrice's eyes filled with unshed tears. "I did, Dad, 3 times. But Selina always said it was my imagination, that I was trying to cause trouble. And you, ... double quotes. She hesitated. You always believed her." The truth of that statement hit Richard with devastating force. In his escape from pain, in his search for a new life that would erase Caroline's absence, he had abandoned his own daughter into the hands of. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Before they could answer, Mrs. Eleanor entered hastily. Her normally serene face was tense. "Mr. Meadows, forgive my intrusion, but we need to talk urgently," she said in a low voice, casting a significant glance at Beatrice. "About your wife and Mr. Thaddeus." Richard stood up, suddenly alert. "Beatrice just told me some disturbing things, Eleanor." The housekeeper nodded, taking a small rectangular device from her apron pocket. "And I have the proof, sir." At that moment, Richard's phone vibrated. It was a message from Richard Nash, his chief accountant, responding to an inquiry made during his return trip, confirming irregular movements in corporate accounts. Unauthorized transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Significant amounts. "We need to talk urgently." Something cold settled in Richard's chest. With a decisive gesture, he took the recorder from Eleanor's hands. "We're going to my office in London right now," he declared. "I want to hear these recordings far from here." "What about Selina?" Beatrice asked, a touch of fear in her voice. Richard looked at his daughter, truly seeing her for the first time in years. "Don't worry. She and Thaddeus think they know how to play, but they forgot who they're dealing with." He extended his hand to Beatrice. "Come, it's time for us to take a little trip. Downstairs." Selina meticulously set the dinner table, while Thaddeus spoke on the phone in a conspiratorial tone. Both looked up, surprised, when Richard descended the stairs with the suitcase he had barely unpacked, followed by Beatrice and Mrs. Eleanor. "Where are you going?" Selina asked, abandoning the cutlery on the table. "An emergency came up at headquarters," Richard replied with studied calm. "I need to return to London immediately." "But you just arrived," she protested, approaching with a forced smile. "Surely your assistance can resolve any problem, not this one." His tone was definitive. "Beatrice is coming with me. It's been a long time since we spent a weekend together in the capital." Selena's face hardened for an instant before softening again into a mask of concern. "Darling, the girl has school tomorrow. Besides, we need to talk about her behavior. The vase, ... Double quotes. "The vase can wait," Richard interrupted. "As for school, one day's absence won't make a difference." Thaddeus, who had been observing the scene with growing unease, stepped forward. "Richard, if the problem is business, perhaps I can help. I have some contacts who ... Thank you, Thaddeus. But I prefer to handle this personally." Richard's gaze was direct and cold. "We'll be back Sunday night. Or perhaps not." The last sentence hung in the air like a veiled threat. For a moment, Richard saw something he had never noticed before in his wife's eyes: genuine fear. "Let's go," he said to his daughter, guiding her towards the door. "You're coming with us. I need someone I can trust to look after Beatrice while I sort out some ... pending matters." In the car, as they drove away through the mansion gates, Beatrice watched the estate fade into the distance under the fine rain that was now falling. Selena and Thaddeus remained on the veranda, two rigid figures whose expressions became indistinguishable. "What's going to happen now,
in the
Dad?"
distance,
she asked in a low voice. Richard exchanged a look with Mrs. Eleanor in the rearview mirror before answering, "Now, my daughter, we're going to get back everything that was taken from us, starting with the truth." And for the first time in 3 years, Beatrice felt she could breathe freely again. Richard's apartment in London, on the 20th floor of a mirrored building in Canary Wharf, was spacious and sophisticated, but it lacked the personal touch of a true home. Designer furniture, contemporary artworks, and a stunning city view couldn't hide the fact that this was merely a transient place, a temporary refuge during long workdays. While Mrs. Eleanor busied herself preparing a snack for Beatrice in the immaculate and rarely used kitchen, Richard paced back and forth in the living room, the phone pressed to his ear. "I understand, Richard. Yes, I want everything documented. And call Dr. George immediately." He paused, listening intently. "Exactly. No additional movements until Monday. Block all her access." Beatrice watched her father from the dining table, where she nibbled on a sandwich with little appetite. She had never seen him like this, his normally composed face replaced by an expression of fierce, almost predatory determination. It was like discovering a completely unknown facet of someone she thought she knew. "Dad," she called, when he finally ended the call. "What's going to happen to Selena and Thaddeus?" Richard approached, sitting opposite his daughter. There was something new in his gaze, a mixture of tenderness and remorse that made Beatrice's heart ache. "They will face the consequences of their actions," he replied in a controlled voice. "What they did wasn't just against me or the companies. It was against you, against our family. Are they going to jail?" The question came out more as a whisper. Richard hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are different kinds of justice, Beatrice. The legal kind, which happens in court, and the personal kind, which happens when we finally acknowledge our mistakes and try to correct them." He reached his hand across the table, covering his daughter's small hand with his own. "I've failed you all these years. I let the pain of losing your mother blind me, and I allowed ill-intentioned people into our lives." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Mommy would be sad if she knew," she murmured. Something broke in Richard's expression. "Your mother, .. not always," began. His voice choked. "Your mother was always better than me at seeing people. She would have seen through Selina instantly." At that moment, the intercom rang. Richard stood up, discreetly wiping away a rebellious tear before answering. "Yes, send them up." He turned to Beatrice and Mrs. Eleanor, who had just entered the room. "It's Richard, my chief accountant, and Dr. George, our lawyer. We're going to listen to the recordings together and devise a strategy." 15 minutes later, 4 adults and a girl were gathered in the spacious living room, all with grave expressions as the audio from the small recorder filled the room. Selina and Thaddeus's voices, crystal clear despite the slight background noise, detailed an elaborate scheme of embezzlement. Double quotes, ... His signature on the Cayman Holdings contract was the last step. Now we have control of 40% of the shares without him realizing it. And how long until we get the rest? 6 months at most. The incapacity clause we included in that document he signed, thinking it was the health insurance renewal, is our guarantee. A strategic psychiatric hospitalization, and the board will transfer control to you as the legitimate spouse. And the girl? I told you, once we have legal control, we send her to some boarding school abroad. Her dead mother's money will fund our Caribbean expansion. ... Richard Nash, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, paused the recording, unable to continue listening. His usually impassive face was pale with indignation. "This explains the transfers we detected," he said, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Almost £6 million have been diverted in recent weeks to shell companies. Your signatures, Richard, perfectly forged. Dr. George Miller, a corpulent lawyer with the confidence of someone who had faced much more complex legal battles, furiously took notes on his tablet. We have enough for a criminal prosecution for fraud, forgery of documents, and attempted embezzlement," he declared without looking up. "The recording, although obtained without the knowledge of those involved, can be used as a basis for a deeper investigation." "What about the company shares?" Richard asked, his voice tense. "The Cayman Holdings contract they mentioned ... double quotes, void. If we can prove it was signed under false pretenses," the lawyer replied, "we need to trace that document immediately." While the adults discussed legal strategies, Beatrice remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what was happening. It wasn't just her father's money or companies, her entire life was at stake. Selina and Thaddeus's plan included definitively separating her from her only parent, erasing her existence from the family that had once been hers. "They'll come after us when they find out we know," she finally said, interrupting the adults' conversation. Everyone turned to her, surprised by the lucidity of that observation coming from someone so young. "Beatrice is right," Mrs. Eleanor agreed, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "I know Selina. She won't give up easily, especially now that she's come so close to what she wanted." Richard exchanged glances with his advisors before nodding gravely. "That's why we need to act first," he declared. "Richard, I want full reports of all accounts by early tomorrow. George, prepare the documents for a formal complaint, but don't file anything yet. I want to be 3 steps ahead when I confront them." "Confront them?" Mrs. Eleanor repeated, alarmed. "Mr. Meadows, don't you think it's more prudent to let the authorities ... double quotes the authorities will have their role," he interrupted firmly. "But first, I need to look into the eyes of the woman who planned to destroy me and understand why." Richard's phone vibrated again. Checking the screen, his expression tightened. Selina. The third call in the last hour. Don't answer, Dr. George advised. The less communication at this moment, the better for our strategy. Richard seemed about to agree when an idea crossed his face. On the contrary, I'll answer and act normally. If they suspect we've discovered everything, they might destroy evidence or accelerate the plan. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call on speakerphone, signaling for everyone to remain silent. Selina. Sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. I've been in meetings since I arrived. Darling, we're so worried. Selina's mellifluous voice sounded artificially anxious. You left so abruptly. Something serious happened. Nothing that can't be resolved, he replied, maintaining a casual tone. Just some irregularities that needed immediate attention. I see. There was a brief pause. And what about Beatrice? Is she still upset about the vase? You know, it wasn't my intention to be so harsh, but she needs to learn to be more careful. Beatrice felt her blood run cold at the blatant cynicism. Richard gave her a reassuring look before replying, Beatrice is fine. In fact, we're planning to spend the entire weekend here. Maybe even extend our stay. Another pause, longer this time. Extend, but what about her school? And the commitments we have on Monday. That meeting with the hotel chain investors, ... Double quotes, I've cancelled all meetings for next week, Richard lied with surprising ease. I think we need some family time. Just my daughter and I. The silence on the other end of the line was almost palpable. Richard, Selina's voice lost some of its artificial sweetness. Is something happening that I should know about? Absolutely nothing, he replied. I just realized I've neglected my only daughter for too long. I see. Her tone turned cold. And what about me? I'm your family too, in case you've forgotten. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, suppressing the anger that threatened to overflow. Of course, I haven't forgotten, darling. In fact, when I get back, we have a lot to talk about, family ... and loyalty. This time, the silence was absolute. I need to hang up now, he continued. I have another meeting in 5 minutes. Of course, Selina finally replied, her voice again controlled. Give Beatrice a kiss. Tell her I'm sorry about the vase misunderstanding. I will. See you Monday, Selina. As soon as he ended the call, Richard released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She knows, he stated, looking at those present. I don't know how, but she senses something is wrong, which means we need to be even faster, Dr. George concluded. I suggest an immediate precautionary measure to freeze their assets before they attempt any desperate maneuver. Richard Nash was already furiously typing on his laptop. I'm accessing the records now. If there are more transfers scheduled, we can cancel them before ... Or quotes, his face suddenly paled. What is it? Richard asked, alarmed. A transfer of £15 million has just been authorized, the accountant replied, turning the screen for everyone to see. Destination, British Virgin Islands. Digital authorization with your electronic signature, dated 10 minutes ago. The shock silenced everyone for a moment. How's that possible? Richard finally inquired. My security token is with me. They don't need the physical token if they have the codes, Richard Nash explained. And apparently, they have access to everything. Dr. George was already on the phone. I'm contacting the court for an emergency freeze, he informed, while waiting to be connected. But frankly, if the money has already left the country... Richard's phone vibrated again. A text message from an unknown number. Game over, darling. You wanted to play? now face the consequences. The next to disappear will be the little girl, just like her mother." Richard's blood ran cold. The explicit threat against Beatrice was shocking, but it was the mention of Caroline that completely paralyzed him. How dare Selina insinuate, "Dad"? Beatrice's voice brought him back to reality. What happened? Before he could answer, the intercom rang again. The doorman informed that police officers were coming up with a search and seizure warrant. "Warrant?" Richard repeated, confused. "On what grounds?" The answer came as the elevator doors opened in the hallway, and authoritative voices demanded entry. Dr. George, already in professional defense mode, opened the door to 3 police officers and a woman in a dark suit. "Mr. Richard Meadows?" asked the older officer. "We have a warrant for your arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." The woman in the suit stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Claudia Moore, from Child Protective Services. We've come to take minor Beatrice Meadows to a temporary shelter, by court order, until your father's situation is clarified." The world seemed to slow down around Richard. From somewhere distant, he heard Dr. George protesting vehemently, demanding to see the warrant, questioning the legality of it all. He saw the horror in Mrs. Eleanor's eyes and, worse, absolute terror on Beatrice's face. "No," the girl whispered, clinging to her father's arm with surprising strength. "I won't leave you. Not again." At that instant, Richard's cell phone vibrated once more. Another message from the unknown number. "As you can see, I always win. Now, who will take care of your precious little daughter?" And then, with crystal clear clarity, Richard understood it wasn't just a financial or legal battle. It was a war for his family's survival, and Selina was willing to use any weapon to win. The minutes following the announcement of Richard's arrest unfolded in a whirlwind of raised voices and papers changing hands. Dr. George, maintaining his professional composure despite the situation, quickly analyzed the documents presented by the police officers. "This warrant," he declared with incisive authority, "was issued based on clearly fabricated evidence. I demand an immediate call to the duty judge." The older officer, a man with a tired expression and eyes that had seen every possible variation of human behavior, hesitated. "We have explicit orders, Doctor. The case involves significant embezzlement, and don't you find it curious," George retorted, "that this warrant was issued on a Saturday night, with unusual speed for our judicial system, precisely when my client is gathering evidence against the true culprits." A tense silence hung in the room. Beatrice remained clinging to her father's arm, her eyes fixed on the representative from Child Protective Services, who maintained an impassive expression. It was Richard Nash who broke the impasse, holding up his laptop. "Officers, I have here documented evidence of a conspiracy against Mr. Meadows, including recordings that prove his wife and brother-in-law are behind the financial diversions. I strongly suggest you listen before proceeding with an arrest that could result in a wrongful conviction lawsuit." Dr. Claudia Moore stepped forward, adjusting her thin-rimmed glasses. "My concern is solely with the well-being of the minor," she declared with professional coldness, "regardless of the financial issues. We have a detailed report on possible mistreatment and a harmful family environment." "Mistreatment," Richard repeated, incredulous. "Against my daughter?" The social worker consulted her file. According to a report sent by Mrs. Selina Meadows, the minor exhibits self-destructive behavior, has caused significant material damage to the family residence, and has a history of compulsive lying, possibly as a result of trauma from maternal loss. She looked up. The complainant expresses concern that the father, frequently absent, does not recognize the gravity of the situation and refuses to seek appropriate psychological help for the child. The indignation that overcame Richard was so visceral that he needed a few seconds to regain his voice. When he finally spoke, each word came out as if torn from within him. "My wife is accusing my daughter of being problematic to cover up her own abuses against her. That is a serious allegation, sir," the social worker replied, imperturbable. "Do you have proof?" Mrs. Eleanor, who until then had watched the scene with growing horror, stepped forward. "I do," she declared, with surprising firmness for a woman of her age. "I've worked in that house for over 20 years. I saw everything that woman did to this child, forcing her into exhausting housework, constantly humiliating her, destroying memories of her mother. Double quotes. "And we have this," Richard added, indicating the recorder on the table, "where they openly discuss getting rid of Beatrice, sending her to a boarding school abroad against her will." The older officer exchanged glances with his subordinates, visibly uncomfortable. The situation was far from the simple arrest case presented to him at the precinct. Sergeant Sterling called one of the younger officers who had stepped away to make a call. "I just received information from headquarters. There's a report of evidence tampering involving this case. Detective Sutton is requesting that we suspend any action until clarification." A momentary expression of relief crossed Richard's face, but it was quickly replaced by concern as he saw the social worker's unwavering determination. "Child Protective Services procedures are independent of the criminal investigation," she insisted. "My role is to ensure the immediate protection of the minor." It was at that moment that Beatrice, summoning a courage that surprised everyone, let go of her father's arm and took a step towards the social worker. Her honey-colored eyes, so like her mother's, fixed on the woman's with a disturbing intensity. "You are being used," she said with impressive clarity for someone so young. "Just like they used my father all these years. Selena doesn't care about me. She wants to separate me from my father because I'm the only one who always knew who she really is, Doctor." Claudia blinked, momentarily disconcerted by the maturity of those words. "My dear," she replied in a condescending tone, "I understand this situation is stressful, but double quotes no." Beatrice interrupted firmly. "You don't understand. Do you know what Selena does when my father travels? She locks me in my room without dinner. She forces me to clean the entire house on my knees. She burned all my mother's photos and said if I told, no one would believe me." Her voice faltered slightly. And she was right. No one believed me. Until today. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the police officers seemed affected by the girl's sincere testimony. "If you take me to a shelter," Beatrice continued, "you'll be doing exactly what Selena wants. Separating me from the only person who truly cares about me." The social workers studied the girl's face for a long moment before turning to the officers. "Given the circumstances and the contradictory allegations, I suggest a more cautious approach," she finally declared. "I can agree to temporary supervision while the accusations are investigated, provided the minor remains in a safe environment with a responsible adult not directly involved in the allegations. Mrs. Eleanor can stay with her," Richard suggested immediately. "She has cared for Beatrice since birth." The housekeeper nodded vigorously. "I have a small apartment in Islington, but it's very clean and suitable. Beatrice would be fine with me." As they discussed the details of this temporary arrangement, Dr. George's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a discreet smile. "Gentlemen, he addressed the police officers. "I have just been informed that Judge Marcia Elcott has taken over the case and ordered the immediate suspension of any warrant against my client until a hearing on Monday morning." His tone was one of contained satisfaction. Apparently, some coincidences caught her attention, such as the fact that the judge who signed the warrant is a cousin of a lawyer recently hired by Mrs. Selina Meadows. The police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "In that case," the sergeant concluded, putting away his documents, "we will withdraw for now, Mr. Meadows, but remain available to give testimony when requested." After the officers left, only the social worker remained, still appearing reluctant. "Dr. George," Richard called as the police left, "can you show Dr. Claudia the recordings we have? I believe she needs to fully understand who she is dealing with." Over the next 20 minutes, the social worker's expression transformed as she listened to Selina and Thaddeus's voices, coldly discussing Beatrice's future as if the girl were merely an obstacle to be removed. When the recording ended, with Thaddeus suggesting to give the brat a scare, there was a new glint of professional indignation in the woman's eyes. "This considerably changes my assessment," she admitted, closing her file. "I will recommend a full investigation into the domestic environment provided by Mrs. Meadows." She turned to Beatrice. "In the meantime, I agree with the temporary arrangement with Mrs. Eleanor, provided there are follow-up visits from Child Protective Services." After her departure, Richard finally could properly hug his daughter, feeling her small body trembling against his. "It's over, Bea," he whispered, using the familiar nickname he hadn't spoken in so long. "You were very brave. What happens now, Dad?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Richard exchanged determined glances with his advisors before replying, "Now, we're going to reclaim what's ours, and ensure that Selina and Thaddeus can never hurt anyone again." That night, while Beatrice slept in the guest room under Mrs. Eleanor's watchful eye, Richard remained in the living room with Richard Nash and Dr. George, developing a meticulous strategy. The recordings were sent for forensic analysis, financial movements were traced, and detailed statements were prepared for presentation to the authorities. They still had the element of surprise, Richard Nash warned, organizing documents. "They don't know we have the recordings, or that we've already overturned the arrest warrant. It's our advantage," George agreed, "but we can't underestimate them. The fact that they managed to get a court order so quickly shows they have powerful connections." Richard, watching the city lights from the wide window, felt a cold determination crystallize within him. "Tomorrow morning, I want to initiate divorce proceedings," he declared, "and I want protective measures for Beatrice. No contact with Selina without supervision." George made notes. "I can ensure that. And what about Thaddeus?" "For him," Richard replied with an unforgiving look, "I want everything the law allows. Every accusation, every penalty. No deals, no concessions." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity behind those words. On Sunday morning, as breakfast was being served by Mrs. Eleanor determined to bring some normalcy to that moment of crisis, the apartment doorbell rang. Richard, already dressed in formal attire, despite the day of rest, answered the intercom cautiously. "Who is it?" "Detective Marcus Sutton, Federal Police," came the grave reply. "We need to speak with you urgently, Mr. Meadows." Richard exchanged worried glances with George before authorizing their assent. Minutes later, a tall, middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, entered the apartment, accompanied by a younger woman carrying a bulky briefcase. "Mr. Meadows," the detective greeted with a firm handshake, I am responsible for the investigation into financial fraud that may involve your companies," he indicated his companion. "This is Dr. Louisa Campbell, our cybercrime specialist. We came personally," the woman explained bluntly, "because the situation has drastically evolved in the last 12 hours. Richard indicated the living room sofas, where everyone settled. Beatrice, curious but apprehensive, watched from the kitchen entrance. "What happened?" Richard asked. The detective opened the folder. Last night, his assistant received an anonymous tip about suspicious transfers involving your companies, he began. "Normally, it would take us days to verify an act, but something peculiar caught our attention. Almost simultaneously, we received an emergency request for your arrest with evidence that seemed perfectly prepared. Too perfectly. The timing was suspicious," Dr. Louisa added. "It looks like a classic setup. So we decided to look deeper before executing any warrant." "And what did you discover?" George inquired, leaning forward. The detective smiled for the first time, a gesture that transformed his stern face into something almost gentle. "We discovered, Mr. Meadows, that someone was very eager to put you in jail before you could defend yourself. He extracted a set of documents from the folder. We traced the transfers to shell companies in the British Virgin Islands. The interesting thing is that all these companies have the same ultimate beneficiary, Thaddeus Vance." Richard felt a wave of vindication, quickly replaced by an urgent question. "And what about Selina? Is my wife involved?" It was Dr. Louisa who responded, consulting her tablet. "We found evidence that Mrs. Selina Meadows accessed your banking systems repeatedly in recent months, always when you were traveling. We have IP records, times, and transactions." She hesitated. "We also intercepted communications between her and Mr. Vance, discussing how to get rid of obstacles." "My daughter," Richard completed, feeling a chill. "They refer to Beatrice as an obstacle." The detective nodded gravely. "Mr. Meadows, we came personally because we believe your family may be at risk, not just financial, but physical." As if to confirm those words, Richard's phone vibrated with a notification from his Aspen Heights home security system. Alarm triggered. Intrusion detected. The security cameras, accessed remotely through Richard's phone app, showed a scene that chilled the blood of everyone present. Selina and Thaddeus frantically ransacking the mansion's study, opening drawers, removing paintings from walls in search of hidden safes, displacing furniture. "They're desperate," George murmured. "They know the net is closing in." The detective was already on the phone, giving instructions for a team to be sent immediately to the mansion. Meanwhile, Beatrice silently approached her father, observing the images with a strangely calm expression. "They won't find anything important there," she said with surprising conviction. Richard looked at his daughter, intrigued. "How can you be sure?" A small smile appeared on Beatrice's lips, the first genuine one in a long time. "Because Mummy taught me where to keep really important things." She hesitated. "We need to go to the conservatory, Dad. There's something there you need to see." At that moment, like a final piece fitting into a complex puzzle, Richard understood that his 11-year-old daughter was not just a victim in this whole story. She was also, in her own way, a silent guardian of secrets that could change everything. Monday morning dawned sunny in Aspen Heights, contrasting dramatically with the judicial storm brewing in the London courts. While Selina and Thaddeus were escorted for questioning under police guard, Richard drove his car along the winding Blue Ridge Mountains Road, with Beatrice in the passenger seat and Detective Marcus in the back seat. "Are you sure we need to do this personally?" the detective asked, checking his watch. "The hearing with Judge Ulcott starts in 3 hours. "Absolutely sure," Richard replied, exchanging a knowing look with his daughter. What Beatrice says is hidden in the conservatory could be crucial to the case. The mansion, when they finally arrived, seemed strangely silent, like an empty shell abandoned by its occupants. The federal police team that had been sent the previous night was still present, guarding the property, while forensic technicians collected evidence in the ransacked study. The suspects were apprehended attempting to leave the city in the early hours, one of the agents informed. They were carrying 3 suitcases with documents and valuables. Richard nodded, but his attention was already focused on Beatrice, who walked purposefully towards the back of the property. The conservatory was a glass and iron structure attached to the main house, originally built by Caroline to house her collection of rare orchids. After her passing, it had become an abandoned space, rarely visited by the new lady of the house. "Selina hated this place," Beatrice commented as she opened the glass door. "She said it was a waste of space and wanted to turn it into a gym." The interior was dusty, with dried foliage and empty pots as silent witnesses to the neglect. Some resilient orchids still bloomed shyly, stubborn survivors of a gentler era. "What exactly are we looking for?" the detective asked, looking around with professional curiosity. Beatrice didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the back of the garden, where a stone bench rested against the wall. With effort, she pushed the bench aside, revealing a small metal door embedded in the floor. "Mummy called this our secret," she explained, kneeling. "She said every woman needs a place to keep her most important treasures." Away from curious eyes, Richard watched, astonished. In all the years he had lived in that house, he had never known of the existence of that hiding place. "Do you need the key?" he asked, approaching. Beatrice smiled, shaking her head. "It's not a common lock." Her delicate fingers pressed a specific sequence on the decorative stones surrounding the door. "It's a code. The date of my birth, the date of your wedding, and the date we came to live in this house." With a soft click, the door opened, revealing a deep compartment, lined with dark blue velvet. Inside was a metal box, some jewelry in velvet cases, and a thick sealed brown envelope. "Mummy showed me this place weeks before, ... Double quotes. Beatrice hesitated. She said one day I would understand why it was before she left. With trembling hands, Richard took the envelope his daughter handed him. The seal, intact, bore the initials C.M. Caroline Meadows. "This envelope was here all this time?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Mummy made me promise I would only show it when it was truly necessary," Beatrice replied, "and that I would know how to recognize that moment." The detective watched the scene with silent respect, understanding that he was witnessing something deeply personal. Richard carefully broke the seal with almost reverent care and extracted a set of meticulously organized documents. As he read, his face shifted from surprise to shock, and finally to painful understanding. "Caroline knew," he murmured, looking up at his daughter. "She knew about Selina from the beginning." The documents revealed a private investigation, conducted by Caroline in the months before her illness worsened. Newspaper clippings about previous financial scams, records of mysteriously failed companies, photographs of Thaddeus with known figures from the financial underworld. More disturbing, a toxicological analysis that suggested her symptoms might have been artificially induced. "Your mother suspected she was being slowly poisoned," Richard explained to Beatrice. trying to soften the brutality of that revelation, and believe that Selina and Thaddeus were already targeting our family long before I met her. The detective, now deeply interested, asked for permission to examine the documents. This would explain a lot, he commented after a preliminary analysis. They weren't improvising. It was a long-term plan. He pointed to a specific section. Your former wife hired a private investigator who connected Selina to at least 2 other similar situations in London and Brighton Bay. Businessmen who lost fortunes after seemingly idyllic marriages. Richard sat heavily on the stone bench, trying to assimilate the scope of those revelations. All this time, Caroline had tried to protect them, even knowing she might not be present to see the outcome. And Beatrice, that extraordinary child, had faithfully kept the secret, waiting for the right moment. "Why didn't you show me this before, Bea?" he finally asked. Beatrice's eyes, so like her mother's, met his with a wisdom beyond her years. "Mummy said you would need to discover some things for yourself," she replied simply. "That if I showed you too early, you might not believe it. You had to see Selina for who she really is, a painful but undeniable truth." In his grief, in his desperate search for comfort, he would have rejected that evidence, considering it a product of Caroline's jealousy or illness. He needed to see Selina's cruelty with his own eyes, to experience her betrayal firsthand. The detective checked his watch, interrupting that moment of reflection. "We need to take these documents to London immediately," he declared. "They establish a pattern of behavior that greatly strengthens our case." On the way back, as the car wound along the mountain road, Richard kept a protective arm around Beatrice's shoulders, who watched the landscape with a serene expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About Mummy," she replied. She's still taking care of us, even though she's not here." Richard felt his eyes well up, but it was no longer the agonizing pain of grief that consumed him. It was a kind of luminous gratitude for the time he had with Caroline, and for the extraordinary daughter she had left him. The court hearing was brief and decisive. Faced with the accumulated evidence, the recordings obtained by Mrs. Eleanor, Richard Nash's financial reports, the documents found in Caroline's hiding place, and the evidence collected by the federal police, Judge Marcia Alcott had no difficulty in making her decision. Selina and Thaddeus would remain detained during the investigations. A protective order would permanently separate Selina from Beatrice, and all illegally transferred assets would be frozen and eventually reverted. Divorce proceedings would be handled with absolute priority, given the exceptional circumstances. "You can be sure the civil part is just the beginning," Detective Marcus assured Richard after the hearing. "The criminal charges are substantial, especially considering your late wife's documents." As they left the courthouse, Richard saw Selina being led to a police car. Their gazes met briefly, his firm, hers a mixture of fury and disbelief. Like someone who had never considered the possibility of losing, she seemed unable to process the reversal of her meticulous plan. "She didn't expect Mummy could still beat her," Beatrice commented, observing the same scene. Richard gently squeezed his daughter's hand. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman, just like you, Bea." 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. The mansion in Aspen Heights was sold, too laden with painful memories to be kept. In its place, Richard acquired a cozy house on the Cornish coast, in St. Ives, where the sea and the constant breeze seemed to slowly wash away the wounds of the past. Beatrice blossomed like a plant finally free from the shadows. Her grades at the new school were excellent again. She quickly made friends, and her smile, something Richard had feared he had lost forever, had returned to brighten her days. Mrs. Eleanor, now officially retired, but vehemently refusing to leave her girl, occupied a comfortable ground-floor suite, from where she commanded the kitchen with unquestionable authority and pampered Beatrice with homemade treats. That particular Saturday afternoon, Richard watched his daughter playing on the beach with her new dog, a rescued mongrel named Einstein due to its constantly hanging tongue and disheveled fur that resembled the famous scientist. "She's happy," Mrs. Eleanor commented, approaching with a tray of iced lemonade. "Truly happy, not that mask of courage she wore for so long." Richard nodded, gratefully accepting a glass. "We are lucky, Eleanor. After everything, we managed to find a new beginning." The housekeeper smiled, her wrinkled eyes following Beatrice, who was now chasing a wave with peals of pure joy. "Carolyn would be proud," she simply said, before returning to the kitchen to supervise the cheese bread baking in the oven. Alone again, Richard allowed himself to relive the events of the past few months. The case against Selena and Thaddeus was progressing solidly, with new victims emerging as the investigation deepened. The duo had perpetrated similar scams on at least 5 families over the last decade, always targeting successful businessmen, preferably widowers or divorced men with young children. The financial diversions had been substantial, but thanks to the rapid intervention of the federal police, most of it had been recovered. The Meadows companies were stable again, now, under Richard's more attentive and present management, who had drastically reduced his travels and delegated more responsibilities to be present in Beatrice's life. A cry of joy brought him back to the present. Beatrice came running towards him, drenched and radiant, with Einstein at her heels. "Dad, I found a huge starfish. Come see." Richard smiled, standing up immediately. "Show me the way, Captain." As he ran across the warm sand following his daughter, Richard felt a deep certainty settle in his heart. The scars would remain, of course, both his and Beatrice's. There would still be difficult days, occasional nightmares, and moments when Caroline's absence would be felt with renewed intensity. But there would also be laughter, discoveries, and the chance to build something new and genuine on the foundations of what Caroline had left for them: courage, truth, and a love that transcended even the most definitive separation. That night, after Beatrice finally fell asleep exhausted from so much sun and sea, Richard found a small diary on her bed. On the first page, in his daughter's still childish but determined handwriting, it was written, "Things I learned from Mummy and never want to forget. Always tell the truth. Even when it's hard, keep important treasures in safe places. Believe that after the storm comes the sun. Forgive. But never forget the lesson. Love is the greatest courage of all." Below, a postscript, "Either for you not to forget." Richard held the small book against his chest, finally allowing himself to cry, not just tears of grief or loss, but of gratitude for the wisdom left by Caroline and preserved by Beatrice. A wisdom that, despite all of Selena's attempts to destroy it, remained alive and pulsing in the heart of that reborn family. Outside, the waves gently broke on the beach, in a constant and soothing rhythm. The new moon allowed the stars to shine with unusual intensity, as if Caroline had arranged a celestial audience to witness the new beginning of those she had loved more than anything. In her room, Beatrice smiled in her dreams, finally at peace. End of story, dear listeners. We hope the story of Beatrice and Richard has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking the button to your left. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, love, and overcoming adversity. What did you think of the ending? Did Beatrice's courage inspire you? We look forward to reading your comments. Until the next story.